Hello, and thank you for joining today's talk with Shanghai-based practice Neri&Hu. I'm Marie Bach-Mortensen, Head of Exhibitions and Interpretation at the Royal Institute of British Architects, and it is my pleasure to welcome you from wherever you may be in the world. For us here in the UK, it is lunchtime, but for Neri&Hu in Shanghai, it is early evening. The benefit of digital events is that we can create a genuine global community, and we encourage you to say hello and tell us where you're joining from in the YouTube chat feed next to the video stream. This afternoon's event is part of our RIBA+VitrA talk series, which continues to showcase the best in contemporary, established and emerging voices in architecture. On behalf of the RIBA, I would like to thank Vitra Bathrooms, who are partnering with the RIBA, for sponsoring this prestigious series. I'm also very pleased to be joined by Christina Rapatsky, Deputy Editor at Desenio magazine, who will be our chair for the talk and provide a short introduction to our speaker. But before I hand you over to Christina, I want to share some information to help you get the best out of this, to get the most out of this digital event. Today's talk will last about an hour and a half, including time for questions at the end. Please use the YouTube chat function to send us any questions, which we'll collate and share with our speakers. Otherwise, you can also email them over to us at talks@riba.org. And don't forget to include your name if you'd like a shout out. We're live streaming today's event, which means that we cannot see or hear you in the audience. So if you do experience any questions or any queries or issues, then email talks@riba.org. and someone will get back to you. We're also recording the event and it will be made available to watch back in the next few weeks. If you are a social media user, feel free to use the hashtag RIBA+VitrA. And finally, after the event, we will send you a very brief questionnaire, and we'll greatly appreciate if you could take the time to feedback your thoughts, ideas, and any issues you might experience. Digital events are new to us and we can only improve by hearing your experience. That's all for me, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the next hour and a half, and I'll now hand you over to Christina to introduce Neri&Hu.
Thank you, Marie. I am delighted to introduce Rossana Hu and Lyndon Neri to the virtual stage of this RIBA lecture. Together, they are Neri&Hu Design and Research Office, an interdisciplinary Shanghai-based practice founded in 2004, which works across the fields of architecture, interiors, furniture design, and graphics, to name just a few. Notable built works, again, just to name only a few, include the Aranya Art Center in Shengguandao, which was completed in the spring of 2019, so just last year. The Suzhou Chapel, a non-denominational multi-faith space outside Shanghai, completed in 2016. And the Split House, residential building in Shanghai, which reimagined the city's lane house typology and which was completed in 2009. I'm sure we'll hear more about these projects presently. In addition to architectural projects, Rossana and Lyndon are also the creative directors of the furniture company Stellar Works, and they also make time for teaching, having held the John C. Portman Design Critic in Architecture post at the Harvard Graduate Design School, the Harvard Graduate School of Design, excuse me, since the autumn of last year. Rossana is also currently a member of the 2021 RIBA International Prize Grand Jury. Neri&Hu have won multiple awards, in fact, so many that listing them now would take up my 5 minutes and more. So I'm just going to leave it at that. They're a practice which wishes, in their own words, to respond to the global worldview. But they are also deeply invested in and interested in the cultural and architectural historic specificity of their city, Shanghai, something I'm sure we'll also hear more about over the next hour. Like Marie said, feel free to put any questions in the comments section as they come up, and we'll collate them and address them after the talk. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rossana and Lyndon.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Marie and Christina. I assume all of you can hear me. I am Lyndon Neri. On behalf of Neri&Hu, Rossana and I want to thank RIBA+VitrA for organizing this talk. We are a practice based in Shanghai, and the place we come from sets the stage for many of our architectural design exploration. There are three conditions that guided us over the last 16 years. That's our office, that our old office, which we will show you our new office. We got kicked out of this particular old office, but three conditions guided us over the last 16 years in our practice, and they could simply be defined as the following: the urban issue of the rapid development and demolition of where we practice today. If you look at the left image, that's Nadav Kander's Chongqing municipality, shot in 2007. To the right is Jia Zhangke, the film director, the movie called 24 City in 2008, the pure madness of concrete monsters that define the urban reality where we are today. If you look at this particular image, sorry, my clicker is not working. So more of Nadav Kander's image showing how urbanization changes the landscape of cities, altering the texture of daily life, giving new rise to new notions of what urban leisure is. So you can imagine a Sunday picnic being held under a massive freeway, and yet it seems quite normal. The next image deals with the idea of rural issue of disappearing villages. And you can kind of tell in here the image, each empty chair representing an absent family member who has left the village to pursue opportunities in urban centers. So you could kind of see how desolate these places have become. The third and equally important is, as a practice, we have been inheriting the remnants of China's industrial heritage. This leads us to many opportunities to reutilize artifacts of leftovers through adaptive reuse. And the old office I had shown you a while ago, sorry. So many of our projects fall under this category of adaptive reuse. If you look to the left, again, more of Kandev Nadir's image, these issues and situations forces us to rework the knowledge we have on local history and heritage. In much of our work, there is this recurrent theme of old and new, the reinterpretation of local typologies, and the desire to celebrate and even elevate the ordinary, the mundane, and the common. We are, in fact, a victim of this. We were forced out of the confines of our office that we showed you. And for the first time, we're going to show you our new office, which deals with this notion of adaptive reuse. We took over a 4-story nondescript derelict dormitory for the China Telecom building and turned it into a mixed-use complex. We occupied the top 2 floors and made a concession with the landlord in which we could rent some of the lower ground and activate the space down below. So that image, this is, sorry, I'm trying to learn how to play with this. There you go. So the first floor is the retail component in which we curated much of the activities down below. There's a gallery, there's retail activity, there's a cafe, and a lot of them have collaborated with us, obviously to the benefit of the people that work in our practice. In the second floor, there's a co-working space and a number of other offices that we rent out to other people. In fact, we have now taken over the building to the right, the light blue building, and we are turning into something else in the next few months. This is the interior that we inherited. We kept most of the major structural component. This is the co-working space that we were talking about. Part of our gallery, part of the conference room. I just want to show you, with the exception of a few opening, which was very specific to this particular project, most of them we kept intact. So this is the context in which our office, Neri&Hu, intentionally situates ourselves as a practice. We are constantly trying to insert meaning into our work by drawing from these contexts, both in geography and in history. For that, we often find ourselves looking at many of our obsessions. And you have heard many of our lectures, perhaps, and we have had numerous obsessions that we deal with. Today, we're going to talk about 3 obsessions. One, we're going to talk about reflective nostalgia, which we've talked quite a bit in many of our lectures, but we're going to introduce 2 other obsessions that is fairly new in this particular setting. One is called recasting vernacular, and the other one is the understanding of what future artifacts is in the context of our practice. So in many ways, it deals with the past, the present, and the future.
As early as about 14 years ago, when we started the firm in Shanghai, we became interested and almost obsessed, like Lyndon said, with the notion of nostalgia. We gained useful insights from a critical examination of the term, its origin, theories surrounding it, applications in various forms of disciplines, and the various architectural extensions and possibilities this reading offers us. The word, you can see here, the word nostalgia is a learned formation of a Greek compound consisting of nostos, meaning homecoming, and algos, meaning pain or ache. Coined around the end of the 17th century as a medical term, nostalgia was thought to be a disease. It was only towards, I think, the first half of the 19th century that nostalgia began to attain its current modern meaning, both in literary and everyday usage. Now commonly understood as a sentimentality for the past, it should be noted that the object of longing is transferred from the concreteness of place to the invariably abstract notion of time. And then in further studying this thinking behind nostalgia, we came upon Professor Svalana Bone's book, The Future of Nostalgia, where she divides this notion into 2 types. One is restorative and the other one is reflective. And it is the second one, reflective nostalgia, that became very useful for us in terms of design and architecture and working with sort of the histories left over from the different cities that we work in. And we will show that through the projects. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so this very first project, we call it Rethinking the Split House. Embedded in the title, you can see that there's an attempt for us to set the project within its historical and typological context. The Lang House, which were once the dominant fabric of urban Shanghai, are now slowly being demolished, taken over by high-density developments all over the city. This is an aerial view of that Lyndon, which is a Lang House community. So here our strategy was to rethink the typology of the Lyndon, the Lang House, keeping the split level formation and add spatial interest through new insertions and skylights to accentuate the architectural integrity of such a typology. Historically, the Lang houses are separate with 2 distinct spaces, a longer and often rectangular space with a smaller room in the back. That creates a split section. They are now typically occupied by 3 or more families sharing the public staircase and landing, so that neighbors living on different levels or rooms have a chance to interact as they move in and out of their personal units. Our first move when we thought about what to do with this Lang House was to insert a new staircase, which served to act as a vertical connection and at the same time served to lock or join the front room with the back room. Here you see the old and the new stairs side by side, and also the bathrooms. Conceivably, the most intimate spaces of each apartment are now inserted next to the most public staircase, separated only by a sandblasted glass divider. And architecturally, the decorative elements added over the last 60 years were stripped off, and large openings were created on the front elevation to improve light qualities to the more public rooms of each floor. It is as if we have sliced off 60 years of time and now forces the building to embrace its community without a mask, without a facade, literally. Urbanistically, it is reshaping the Lane House typology with the transparency and modernity that fulfills the vitality of contemporary life. At the same time, when your neighbors gaze into your everyday life, the city is open to your private viewing. And to respect history and to live alongside history does not necessarily mean a certain Disneyfication, nor is complete preserving the past suitable in every case. With this project, we tried to offer other critical methodologies to reinvent.
The next project is a project that many of you might be familiar with. We call it the vertical lane house, commonly called the water house. When we were approached to have the opportunity to do a project on the Bund, naturally my first instinct was thinking that we had this opportunity to be part of history. There are only 32 historical buildings along the Bund in Shanghai. So naturally, perhaps not so much Rossana, but myself, the arrogant self of me, thought maybe I will be able to have this opportunity to be part of this 32. Well, I was wrong. This was the building we inherited, which was a dilapidated warehouse south of the Bund. And if you know your Shanghai, there is the north part and the south part. North part is being developed quite aggressively right now. But we were given this. So initially I was quite disappointed, but the second more shocking aspect of this project was when the client decided that we need to tear this project down. Initially, I thought it could be interesting to do a new building. This was the first time we were given a chance to do architecture. So naturally, as a young practice then, we thought it would be very exciting. But when we saw the brief, the second shock came, which was they wanted us to do Mayfair London, which is the aesthetic of Mayfair London. That sent shockwaves, not just to me, but my small office at that time. So we decided as a practice, a concerted effort to convince the client that we have to keep this particular building. Naturally, given that our clients are Chinese, we made a point to tell them that by saving many of these remnants, you will save a lot of money. That often works with Chinese clients. Having said that, we then decide to explore on Calvino's quote, and I'll read this to you. Arriving at each new city, the traveler find again a past of his that he did not know he had. The foreignness of what you no longer are or no longer possess lies in wait for you in foreign, unpossessed places. Interestingly enough, Calvino talks about the notion of a traveler as opposed to a tourist. So what we did was we made a conscious effort. These were initial sketches we had. Some of them are a little bit different than what we have now. But the idea was to tackle this project from a traveler's point of view as opposed to a tourist. So this building is located in what is supposedly the docks development on the South Bund district of Shanghai. It is a 19-room boutique hotel built in an existing 3-story Japanese Army headquarters building from the 1930s. The boutique hotel fronts the Huangpu River. So across from this main thoroughfare, you are confronted with the massive Huangpu River that divides Puxi and Pudong. And it looks across the gleaming Pudong skyline, which is commonly what people remember Shanghai as. And oftentimes, that is perhaps not necessarily the most historical Shanghai, because if you know your Shanghai, Pudong is only about 40 years old. The architectural concept behind a renovation rests on a clear contrast of what is old and new. The main entrance takes you into an interior lobby, and all of which we were commissioned to do. It expresses both a blurring and inversion of the interior and exterior, as well as between the public and private realms, creating a disorienting yet refreshing spatial experience for the hotel guests. We saw this as providing a uniquely Shanghai experience for the traveler who is not looking for the standard hotel encounter. So you can imagine the roughness of it. Even my relatives, my parents were baffled, let alone the government official and the client. Oftentimes, the common question was, is this project completed? And they thought we were cutting corners. But in many ways, it was intentional. It was intentional in that we were trying to make a point that preservation could be seen in a different light. And the other point that we were dealing with was the dialogue between the interior and the exterior, the notion of public and private. You see this rather massive, almost introverted exterior seen with extremely light, open atrium, courtyard, for a lack of better description. So this contrast is very clear, and yet at the same time, when you're in the bedrooms, in between, there's this constant fixation between the people who are staying in the rooms and people outside of it. It is a typical condition of lane houses here in Shanghai, wherein privacy is not common. There's that constant dialogue between people who are in the house and outside the lane. The public spaces in this particular space, which is the lobby, allows you to peek into private rooms, while the private spaces invite one to look out at the public arenas. You see this very clearly here, and there are many more images that I will show you, wherein rooms can be seen from one room, can see another room, and that the idea of that voyeurism, which is very common in lane houses in Shanghai, ramps that connects three disparate buildings because they are in different levels, were sensitively inserted into the building to give it that cohesion and clarity in terms of language. This is the restaurant down below, wherein it is sandwiched by the street to the left and the courtyard to the right. And there are slits above where you can look up and you will be able to see different bedrooms, and the bedroom in turn can look down and be able to see the restroom, the activities of the restrooms. You see that slit looking up to the bedrooms. From the bedrooms and the balcony, there's that constant relationship between that balcony to the other room, and from the other room looking into your room. These conditions that are very prevalent. We played along with stainless steel fabrication and cladding for all the louvers. So it gives you that reflection on some of the patina in the building. And you can kind of see from this room, you'll be able to see the other little girl in the other room, that constant engagement with the people next to you. These visual connections of unexpected spaces not only bring an element of surprise, but also force the hotel guests to confront the local Shanghai urban condition. This is a section of the building with existing stairs that we've kept, and the patina itself, most of which we have kept intact with the exception of sealing them to ensure that it stays clean. Some of the stairs lead to nowhere. It was commonly said that this building was a warehouse for people to keep opium. So some of these stairs, there were 4 of them, some of which went to nowhere. So when the cops come, they will be confused. So we kept many of these important incidents and situations. This is not a mirror. This is an exact room across from your room. There is a slit down below where you could look down. And when you look down, you look at the restaurant. The reflection of the louver actually allows you to see a glimpse of the courtyard down below. So there's always that interaction between privacy and the outside world. So this project possesses memories of the city that would have otherwise been demolished if no new life or new program was brought to the building. This part of the waterfront will disappear. In fact, at this point of time, it represents a fresh example of preservation without exactly preserving the material nature, the so-called as is, but building on layers of what used to be material, surfaces, spaces, light, memories, and creating a new, uniquely new identity. To a certain extent, it is representing a new, vibrant Shanghai, a vertical lane house. There is video that should come. I think I'm not gonna click, otherwise it's just gonna move forward. We have made a conscious effort to video our projects because we believe that architecture is not just about beautiful drawings and models, both of which is very important in our practice, but the video component of it is another facet, another medium in which we use to be able to convey some of the spatial qualities that some of the people that might not have the opportunity to travel to Shanghai will be able to experience this particular phenomenon, the spatial experiences. So the next obsession we want to talk about tonight, which is lunchtime, your time, London time, is the notion of recasting vernacular. To situate this next set of projects, we start with a series of questions. What is at stake for architecture today in relationship to identity, where in a globalized world in the digital age have radically altered the conventional notion of local versus global, center versus periphery? What form can critical regionalism, a concept coined by Kenneth Frampton, has any relevance to today's architecture that diverges from an ethnocentric view of regional modern expression as inherently working against the imagined core of Western hegemony? Is it possible to arrive at an architecture that is rooted in the particularities of place, yet also transcends its local to resonate universality? We were really taken by this particular book and this particular phase by Nihal Pereira when he wrote, stepping outside of positivist epistemological structures, learning from the past, the locals and distance cultures, and displacing East-West, which is very common, local-global, which we hear all the time, and modern traditional binaries. The critical vernacularists, he argued, have produced third spaces for the creation and expression of local modernities. This particular third spaces is what we're interested in. And why is that? Given the fact, if you look at all the rural areas in China, and given the fact that government catalog indicates that 80% of about 9,700 examples of intangible cultural heritage are in the rural area, we have no choice but to rethink about the local vernacular. We ask ourselves these questions because as our practice has evolved, the Chinese economy has also seen a marked shift in developing inland provinces and rural hinterlands. As our projects have expanded in recent years, from urban centers to the rural periphery of China, it is imperative that we need to adjust and adapt to the new reality. Trying to find this modern expression that Nihal had talking about for an architecture that is contemporary and timeless at the same time, by virtue of its inseparable relationship to the very local traditions, materials, topography, and other intangible specificity. This is the third space that we talked about. So as a practice, you will see that we are commonly interested in typology. Many of our projects, oftentimes people will look at them and naturally there will be clear reference to Nongtang or Linong, which is mostly in Shanghai, or the courtyard houses up north in Beijing, or the cave dwellings in the middle of China, or the Tulou, the circular dwellings that are in Fuzhou or Fujian. So all these from these typologies are interesting to us, but more than typologies, like many Chinese architects practicing today who are exploring these typologies, we have found them to be critical in informing how we link new projects into a broader historical context, local lineage, and specificity. And at the same time, beyond typology, it was important for us that the investigation go further. We need to start to look at vernacular construction materials and methods. Similar as with the approach to typology, we do not seek to transplant outdated modalities or take literal translations of a bygone element, something of the past, and just for nostalgic reason use them to make you feel good, but rather to interpret them and giving them a fresh interpretation, a fresh modern interpretation. The next three projects will address these issues of recasting, what we call recasting vernacular.
So the first of those three projects is the Suzhou Chapel. This project is about 1.5 hours drive from Shanghai in a general vicinity of Jiangnan. Jiangnan literally means south of the Yangtze River, and it is situated next to a famous scenic lake And this is also, it's a lake famous for crabs. So people come here and eat the best crab, the best fairy crabs. It is a featured building within a larger village zone. As such, it occupies a prime location visible from the main road and along the waterfront. Here, I want to draw your attention to the left drawing, which is from Wu Guanzhong, showing a painterly rendition of a particular kind of vernacular sublime. It's characteristic of the white walls and gray clay tiles found in the Jiangnan water towns. So interestingly, he has modernized the traditional ink brush strokes with watercolor, creating a new way of representation not seen before. We were looking at this integration of ink brush with watercolor, marveling at the sensibility of this new medium against the old ink tradition, and wanted to see how, through architecture, we could find a unique articulation for such a kind of representation. So the program called for a small chapel, non-denominational. We employed a simple design language derived from the grays and the whites of this region, expressed in undulating brick walls and a floating white volume. Here you see it in the form of a model. And you can see the elevations are very, very simple. This is the plan, the site plan. One approaches the brick wall entry from the upper right corner, and the walls made from reclaimed bricks begin with a refined scale where different heights interweave to create a choreographed landscape journey. And it leads one to the building itself. So you go through those brick path, and then you get to this place, which is the beginning of your journey inside the building. Here, the main chapel is on the ground floor with a mezzanine level above. And you can see in this section, adjacent to the 12-meter chapel is a prominent staircase. The side staircase leads one through a different kind of journey. It's prominent not because of its sides, but because it has a really interesting function. For the rich sensorial experience you get from walking up and down the stair. The play of light and shadow, the sound from the chapel is heard, but you are hidden from the crowd. If the chapel is for people to congregate, here it's for isolation and contemplation. This journey also leads you to the mezzanine, where the mezzanine level hovers overhead to accommodate extra guests and includes a catwalk encircling the space, allowing a 360-degree viewing angle. And there is a wood louver cage that wraps around the whole second floor. This is a small detail you can see. From the back of the mezzanine, you could also go out here on top of the brick walls to gain a view of the whole village. And tectonically, the white volume is especially treated with 2 layers of exterior. The inner layer, a simple concrete box, punctuated on all sides with scattered windows. The outer layer is a folded and perforated metal skin, a veil, if you will, that alternatively hides and reveals. In the daytime, the white box shimmers gently in the sunlight, subtly exposing its contents. And at night, the white box becomes a jewel-like beacon in the neighborhood. The layer windows emit a soft glow in all directions. And I think we have a film that we want to show. You can see that the white floating box really sits on this very gray and white articulation from these reclaimed bricks. And for us, that's kind of, part of this sublime that I was talking about from the Jiangnan region. I think do we have a technical problem?
It's the movie Frozen.
Okay, I think it's going. So you will see this is part of the water actually reaches right towards the back of the building. So from inside the sanctuary, you can see the water. And this is walking above the pathway, which is right above the covered brick walk. So the meandering walk, this is the first project that we actually explore this, but you will see another project later on that works very well with this meandering reclaimed brick walk. Because when you are actually on the road, you can never get a straight frontal image of the building. But it's only when you go through the walk that you're confronted with the building. So this is towards the back of the sanctuary, and this is the mezzanine level where you can circumvent the sanctuary space from the second floor.
So in many ways, the forms are rather modern, but you can kind of see from the play of the materials, both the exploration of the bricks, the recycled bricks that are common in this particular region, the white walls, and the texture and the patina and the play of material and the construction technology is very much part of that local vernacular. And yet by introducing a new understanding by using these local materials and recreating spaces that are probably not so familiar, it creates that third space that we are exploring. That new vernacular, that possible new modern vernacular. Due to time, I'm looking at the time, I'm gonna not finish that video. My sincere apologies. We're gonna go to the next project. It's an ancestral hall. While China's city continues to grow at unprecedented speed, its rural villages, as we have talked about, suffer the opposite fate as the population migrates to urban centers for employment opportunity. It is often said that Chinese culture stems from these rural roots. And so in essence, the villages, when the villages disappear, so does its culture. So does the culture. Recognizing this phenomena, when we were asked to do this project, we were immediately drawn to the briefing of designing a contemporary ancestral hall situated in the rural mountain village of Beijing. And you can kind of see this particular site. The development is not done yet. This was the old village that have asked us to do an ancestral hall for them. So ancestral halls historically were a common building typology throughout Chinese history, playing an important role in villages, in village life and society. At the time, and even still today, many villages were formed by extended families sharing a common surname. Some of them might not be related. They might be third or fourth degree separated, but to a certain extent, they are somewhat connected with a traceable lineage through multiple generations. These are usually a place that fills the functional needs of the village, such as hosting weddings, funeral, and other rites, a place for educating youth, and even for settling of disputes. The ancestral hall was more importantly a physical representation of the strength of the lineage, a constant reminder of the deep-rooted connection between old village members. The idea of the ancestral hall in the context of a new residential development that will be surrounding this particular village is to, in many ways, reestablish a sense of unity for this village and solidarity to counteract the collective experience of displacement and rootlessness of a largely migrant population, at the same time also to react to the many development in this particular area. So we've taken into the typology of the courtyard, researching into the typologies that is important to us. And in this particular case, if you look at many of the older vernacular ancestral hall, the typologies is tied to a courtyard typology. So in the case of in this particular project, key components of the typology were quickly identified: the symmetry, the sequence of threshold, which leads from public to private, and the courtyard, whose void spaces dictate how rooms and circulation should fall into place. Our design takes these as the fundamental organizational principles of the building, while also adapting to the two main programmatic needs of this particular community: a large multi-purpose exhibition hall and a smaller display area to showcase artifacts from the existing village upon whose land the development is built around. So these are some of the diagram that we played with, and a very simple floor plan with 3 different courtyard. One is open to the sky, to the element. The second one is a 2-story courtyard space. Sorry, I lost my clicker.
Why don't you say next? They can do it.
Next, yeah. And so you see the building here, while remaining true to the floor plan of the vernacular typology. Our reinterpretation brings innovation in the section, as you can see in the model to the right, as well as in the materials and construction. The design take advantage of modern concrete construction to create much larger spans and openness in the building. The multi-purpose hall is fully double height with a series of north-facing clear story windows. Next.
Next.
So a concrete post and beam structure forms the rigorous framework for the overall rectangular mass. The wall infill consists of locally harvested rock, built up by traditional masonry techniques. The smoothness of poured concrete accentuates the roughness of the stone walls, paying homage to the rural building craftsmanship. So open to the sky, the first courtyard features traditional tiled roofing on all 4 sides, acting as a forecourt to the main interior space of the grand exhibition hall situated just behind. Flanking the courtyard on either side are long colonnaded corridors which connect all the way from the front to the back of the building and link up with 2 staircases on each far end. And you will see the concrete is not only relegated to merely structural role. At times it is almost sculptural in its form, especially at the end, carved out to create staircases, small balconies, cantilevered tilted planes to bring lights into the space. And you see even on the 2nd floor, bridges that connects, that surrounds the courtyard, at the same time that connects different spaces. The tectonic simplicity of the building facade is enhanced by these unexpected mutations, which give the architecture a sense of austerity as well as dynamism, both characteristics ingrained in the role that ancestral halls play in a community. These are some of the other perspective images. This is the bridge that connects both the courtyard overlooking the multi-purpose facility, that enclosure, the only open space, reaching the rear end of the building. If you look at the end, the smallest courtyard perhaps, a sweeping concrete curve draws your eyes up to the sky as light washes down the textured end wall. Here, there is no defined function except as a space of quietness and reflection to contemplate on the common ground we share with all those who came before us. So some of these images, if there would be an event wherein some of your forefathers would have been displayed, and you would come not so much to worship, but pay your respect, reaching the rear of this building and the light coming in. This is sort of the strategy and the idea behind what we're trying to do.
This next project, last of this grouping, is the Neri&Hu Resort. This is located about 3 hours train ride in north of Shanghai, in a famous historic city called Yangzhou. And Yangzhou is known for scenic lakes and among other attractions. This site is next to a beautiful lake called Slender West Lake. The program was to design a 20-room hotel, actually country inn, country retreat. And the site, when we got it, has been dilapidated for a very long time. The design brief called for the adaptive reuse of several of the old buildings on this ruined site by giving them new functions while adding new buildings to accommodate the hotel's capacity needs. Before starting the design, what we did was study the local village typology, again, paying close attention to what was there in this town, and found that there were interesting traditional clusters of courtyards and also different hybrids that were transformed through the years. And most interestingly, we found some features from studying the courtyards in the city. The courtyards, they give hierarchy to the spaces, they create vistas, frame views of the sky and the earth, they encapsulate landscape into architecture, often blurs the relationship of interior and exterior in strange but very interesting ways. So these meandering alleys became our focal point and point of departure for our design. And it's almost like everything about this project kind of stemmed from this discovery. From this aerial view, you see a clear orthogonal orientation. The planning department mandated that we only build on the existing footprint. So as a strategy, we formed cover walkways or alleys to organize different zones of the hotel, to guide circulation of the guests and also the employees, the servers, and also to wrap the buildings within. We wanted to work with a traditional typology found in Yangzhou, something that is definitely vernacular, but also create something entirely contemporary and unique, something belonging just to this project. The adjacent ponds and waterway you see surrounding areas became part of the total landscape. We were able to sort of borrow views way beyond the perimeter walls. This is a visual strategy that Chinese gardens often used. With the walls, within the walls, several of the courtyards are occupied by guest rooms and other shared amenities, such as the reception, the library, and restaurant. Many of the building roof lines are confined within the height of the walls, just low enough so that they are not visible from outside the compound. This is the reception courtyard and the interior, the check-in area. And in this courtyard, within the water, there's a sunken seating as part of the landscape. And one of the semi-private courtyards from a bedroom suite. And one of the courtyards formed by these walkways is this outdoor theater. This, you see the relationship of one of the walkways to one of the courtyards. So journeying along the walls, guests can also ascend through openings above to gain privileged vantage points that look out across the gridded landscape and beyond to the surrounding lakes. Hotel guests traverse the site using wall path to discover their rooms. Once within, there's a clear separation between the building and the walls, layering of privacy and sliver of landscape for guests to enjoy. And constructed entirely from reclaimed gray bricks, the walls have these narrow interior pathways that are a lot like what used to be there. Also noteworthy is that, these reclaimed bricks were brought in from various sites around this town. Different time of the day brings in sunlight at different angles. Journeying along the wall, the guests can also ascend towards openings above. And above, we gain a privileged view of that lookout across the gridded landscape. With this project, Neri&Hu's ambition lies in utilizing a strong landscape element, the wall and courtyard, to unify a complex site and program, while the rustic materiality and layered spaces seek to redefine tradition with a modern architecture language. So this Yangzhou project was inspired by the traditional alleyways and courtyards found in its vernacular past, with some careful rethinking about the retreat program and the movements of the guests between rooms, landscape, and common facilities. Here we worked with non-urban sites where the existing buildings were almost mostly demolished, but these buildings left their ghost footprints. So the design assignment kind of came from this reworking of the found imprints. How could we use them to recast a new vernacular? We sought for this recasting to serve as new functions for future use, but still retain the nuanced sensibilities so intrinsic to Yangzhou's heritage and way of life.
So what started as objects that are disparate, seemingly not aligned, footprints that are in different places, by having a strategy that we inherit, that we actually saw from a typology within the city. One of the mansions, one of the houses in the city center had this particular walkway and a gridded walkway. We decided to use this strategy and implement it in a place that seems a bit chaotic. It seems like there was no order, but by having this new vernacular experience, this vernacular typology language imposed into the space, all of a sudden it gives that the hotel a new whole, a new holistic experience, and in many ways brings back many of the older Yangzhou's past that is now relevant in this place that is at one point left abandoned.
So from the film, you can see that they all look like maybe they're similar walkways, but they may or may not be, because the entire complex, wherever you go, basically you are walking alongside these reclaimed bricks. And it really goes back to what I said earlier, that when we visited Yangzhou and we saw a lot of these older traditional buildings, they had these walkways that guide you and lead you from one room to another, from one courtyard to another.
So due to time, we're gonna get to our last obsession. For those of you that are interested in sort of the whole film, you can, I think it's in YouTube. So the last obsession is called Future Artifact. And I think this is rather important to us. This word in Chinese means demolition. It's interesting, it's an artwork, an artist that created 100 signs that talks about the idea of demolition. So the demolishing the old and replacing with new, raising the old to make the idea of a tabula rasa. And you can kind of see this phenomena has been quite crazy the last 20 years, the idea of creative direct destruction, a term originating from economist Joseph Schumpeter about the postmodern condition of late capitalism, but also a term used by sociologist Richard Sennett in his description of how creative destruction is applied to Chinese cities. For China, the concept and attitude of restoration, revival is very different from the West. Keeping ruins in disrepair is not culturally acceptable. So I'm going to show you the next image here, which is interesting. I've shown you a bit of Nadav Kander's image to the left. The one to the right is quite interesting. It is by Jia Zhangke, a clip of Jia Zhangke's movie. In both images, it shows instances of creative destruction and creative evolution. Nadav Kander's was taken in 2005, between 2005 to 2007, capturing some of the rapid changes in China's built environment, where you can kind of see high-rises sitting in demolition site without really infrastructure around the new buildings. Jia Zhangke's documentary captures a portrait of Shanghai as it undergoes urban transformation in preparation for the World Expo of 2010. This was just 10 years ago. Interestingly enough, Manolha Dargis of New York Times, she wrote about Jia Zhangke's work, which was very interesting to me and to us. She said, it opens on a precisely framed cityscape, a statue of an imperial lion. You can see that imperial lion right there in the foreground. It's back to the camera. The lion faces a dense yet coherent tableau, which is segmented into distinct visual tiers. Right in front of the line is a vertical swath piled with what looked like huge chunks of concrete, probably building debris. Cars and people pass through the middle of the shot nonchalantly. Just past this is a smattering of squat old-fashioned brick buildings, and taking up the rear are soaring modernist towers. This isn't just a vivid snapshot, she said, of a contemporary city in transition. It is also an entire history distilled in one extraordinary images. This is the condition we deal with, and many of the layers of what we called old and new, construction and destruction, artifact being old, the future being new, the sense of permanence and temporary. This is not happening within the last 50 years, but actually the last 20 years. So we go back to Aldo Rossi's statement of the city. So here he said, I have defined a persistent urban artifact as something very similar to a monument. In fact, I am inclined to believe that persistence in an urban artifact often causes it to become identified as a monument, and that a monument persists in the city both symbolically and physically. A monument's persistence or permanence is a result of its capacity to constitute the city, its history and art, its being and memory. So you can kind of imagine these being important. But let me define a little bit of the notion of destruction or perhaps ruin in both Western understanding and Chinese or Eastern understanding. So the notion of ruinophilia and George Siemens' notion of ruin and nature. So image on the left is of Roman ruins versus image on the right is a painting by Xi Tao as part of his Yellow Mountain series. The left images shows the Western romantic notion of ruins associated with an aesthetic. Right image shows the Chinese notion of ruins, which is less overtly tied to visual remnants, but instead evoked through absence, voids, and the imagery of ancient trees by symbolizing both death, decay, as well as rebirth and continuation. This echoes the idea that the difference quite clearly. In the West, the notion of the ruin has been associated with a certain aesthetic value, its age value of a manufactured form as theorized by Rigel. The depiction of ruins in the visual arts often takes on romantic view where the tension between contrast is highlighted, picturesque and exotic, indigenous and foreign, nature and artifice to evoke a sense of the sublime. So what is the major difference in this particular case? In contrast, in Chinese art and literature, depiction of ruins have very little literal depictions that capture the image of ruins. Chinese poetic genre of huaizhou, lamenting the past or meditating on the past. Ruins are captured in literary and visual arts mainly through allusion, rather than direct literal representation. Ancient buildings were mainly timber construction, so the structures are often destroyed. Perhaps this is a Northern Asian phenomena because you also see this in Korea and Japan. Ruins, the word and the oldest term for ruins in Chinese is qiu. So in many ways, the original meaning referred to a natural mound or hillock, a small mound denoting the ruined site of a village town or a dynastic capital. Qiu connotes a mound of rubble. So unlike the European architectural ruin, Chinese ruins no longer convey original grandeur as a superstructure, usually have disappeared, leaving only their foundation in the form of a rubble. Qiu indicates the location of a former artifact, but does not preserve its shape, let alone architecture. The crucial difference lies in the concept of ruins being dependent on this notion of erasure and void, resulting from the destruction of the original artifact, signifier of emptiness and void. What does this future artifact, this structure, what can it serve to bring back a part of memory? The future artifact here left is about a physical urban artifact, as Rossi would imagine it, but a destination and or a new structure that celebrates the grandeur of perhaps a history, a place, a cultural memory, and or a relic. To this, the difference is rather big, but to us, it's very important.
So we have 2 more projects. I'm not sure how we're doing with time. So I will try to make it faster, maybe skipping through some of the things that may not be so important. So this next project, so we're moving away from Shanghai. You know, we went to Suzhou, we went to Yangzhou. Now we're even further away. We're in Sichuan. But before I dive into the design, I think it's really important for us to look at this iconic image of Emeishan or Mount Emei. And it's really the site of our project, and it's also the focal point of our project. For over 1,000 years, this mountain has remained one of the most deeply spiritual places in China. It is extremely significant because you see it in Chinese literature and art history. You know, emperors from different dynasties and official scholars, they graced it as a tradition. Travelers and hermits visited for its beautiful view and the subliminal monumentality it represents. Within this context, we entered a design competition about 3 years ago, and fortunately we won. And we were given this really interesting challenge of designing a distillery and brand home for China's first whiskey. This was an opportunity to create a timeless architecture that echoes the core values of the new brand, and also kind of test some of our thoughts about what Lyndon had just talked about, you know, this future artifact and how can we build on these concepts. The nature around the site became our primary inspiration. The left picture is the bird's eye view of the site, and the right is our model showing all the building components. Here you see a rendering of the master plan. I don't think I'm going to go into it too much. Basically, you see that there's a river that runs around it, and then 3 main buildings. And I will talk more about the main buildings later. Really important, even though you may not read Chinese, are these 3 sets of pairings, 3 sets of dualities that kind of form the basis of our concept. They're deeply Chinese and Taoist in concept, this duality. And it's about that, 2 words, they form a vocabulary that means something, but they also are harmonious reunions of contrasting elements. So in fact, they complement each other to form interesting meanings. So these things are, these 3 concepts are really, really important for us in this project. So the first duality is 始末, which means beginning and ending, start and finish. So this duality implies a timeline that is inherent in the actions of starting, finishing, and leaves us with the concept of heritage, right, and history and nostalgia. And the second pairing is more about the whiskey making. It's 清烈, which describes the crafting of the making, right, from the grains to the actual drink that we drink, which is the whiskey, from pure water to the strong spirit. The duality of clear and strong, which we're seeing as contradictory, but pairs well together. That forms a complex temperament. And the third duality literally means mountain and water. And it refers to our mountain, the Emei Mountain, and this creek that surrounds our site. So it refers to this geographic duality that makes up the world we live in, and also a literary trope in numerous Chinese poems. This journey starts here for the visitors who come to the distillery. Water is a recurring design theme. The water channel on the left, which you can see here, guides the visitors all along the journey as they move around the site. Next is the tasting room. It's the tasting experience. It's partially submerged underground. There are 5 subterranean tasting rooms surrounding a domed courtyard with a water feature in the middle. On the exterior, where the 3 concentric brick rings are perched atop the dome with stepped layers alluring to the rippling of water. The sculptural landform is an iconic feature that can be seen from every part of the journey, but it also acts as a viewing platform where you can see the Emei Shan. And the basic material palette here is made with a variety of concrete, cement, and stone mixtures, which resonates with the strong mineral presence of the site. On the other hand, the accent materials are drawn from materials used in whiskey making. And the result is a fine-tuned balance of rustic and refined, hard and soft, cool and warm, natural and crafted. Again, the duality concept we insisted throughout. And finally, you come to this visitor sequence of, the final sequence is this restaurant and bar. The solid walls form a square courtyard that is oriented to frame the Emei peak. So you can see it before you actually go up. And the shanshui, or mountain water duality, is expressed here. The frame mountain in distant view and the pool of water within arm's reach. The humbleness and simplicity of the project rose out of a profound respect for nature. The Emei Mountain and the creek have been there for thousands of years. And what could we do but to build something so insignificant in comparison? So here, the monumentality is achieved not by any physical edifice, but how our experience is connected to everything this Emei Mountain holds in our culture's memory. We have actually a quick film that shows you, this is under construction right now. So it's quite exciting for our team because I think every week there has been really great progress. So you can see this, I think, was a aerial filming about maybe a month and a half ago. And we are due to visit the site in another week, hopefully to see, more progress And basically you can see the formation these are the rectilinear buildings are the actual distillery. They're like factory buildings where they have the casks. And this is the experience room, the tasting experience room. And one important element is the whole landscaping around it. And we found really great local stone to form most of the exterior walls in the landscape. So I think we will probably stop it, and we can move, that way we can move to the final project.
So the final project, we call it The Void Aranya Art Center, about 3 hours east of Beijing, Qinhuangdao, which is a resort seaside community. We were asked by an amazing developer, who was famous for commissioning many famous architects, Chinese architects, to build a library, and many of you are probably familiar, called the Lonely Library by Vector Architects, the Chapel by Vector Architects, the UCCA Dune Art Center by Open Architecture, and many others. So when we got this call, we were really excited because we thought maybe, just maybe, we would have another building by the seaside or by the water. And so when I visited this, we were confronted with this density. And you can imagine leaving Shanghai and seeing this particular density, and we were asked that that particular site was ours and that we were supposed to do this building. And I said, what happened to the seaside? He goes, well, it is a few meters away, but this cultural center is very important to us. You have to remember this density, this old building was really not old. It's a fake Mediterranean Spanish looking building. So to add insult to injury, these buildings were not even beautiful European buildings that had hundreds of years of history. So we took it with stride, given the fact that we thought maybe this would be a perfect opportunity to do something very different. So what we did was we actually did something rather introverted. When we were approached to design this art center inside the seaside resort, we knew that we have to question the notion of space, the space for art versus the communal space. We also question the idea of what this urban artifact should be in the fake Mediterranean community. We decided to celebrate the landscape instead. Unlike the other distillery, which Rossana just described to you, you had Emeisan as a backdrop. Here we don't. So we were given this urban setting, an urban setting that is not so Aldo Rossi in terms of its monumental quality. So we decided to create a focal point instead to celebrate the seasonal changes of this seaside community. The brief was very straightforward. The most important thing was to have that public space down below, or an auditorium down below, for people to congregate. And there was this emphasis in this development for the spiritual nature of their lifestyle ideology to be conveyed, this certain sense of oneness with an environment. So the design scheme is as much about the internal courtyard, a communal space for the residents, as it is about the exhibition being displayed in the center. So this is an aerial view of that particular. You'll see the seaside a distance away, and you'll probably see some of this remnants beautiful building. Well, ours is quite far away from it. And despite the spiritual ideology behind this developer, there was nothing spiritual about this particular project or this development. So we decided by creating a new artifact, perhaps a future artifact that starts to celebrate the seasonal ocean waters nearby, the azure and calm that are in the summers and splintered ice through the winter. So the design the building design attempts to encapsulate the natural wonder of water as its core. And you will see in our drawings, in our diagram, the circulation that wraps around the core with the art gallery surrounding this particular core. What is quite clear is that the central void space can be reconfigured and used in many ways, a water feature when filled with water, but also a functional performance and gatherings place when the water is drained. Composed primarily of various textured concretes, with and without aggregate, the facade and materiality of the building is heavy in nature, like a solid rock sitting firmly in the shifting environment. Smooth surfaces reflect the changing skies, while the molded modular units pick up on the play of shadows throughout the day. There are bronze elements which you're not seeing in here, but it starts to break away from the massiveness and gives it certain delicacy, delicateness to this massive proportion. And you see this at night, the building lights up. This is the entry, the custom detailing, and some of the bronze details probably not very clear in this particular image, but you will see in the floor plan, within the thick mass of the building volume is a series of interlocking spaces that visitor can meander freely within, slowly ascending from the left side, which you can see very clearly, enjoying a choreographed journey with directed view, both inwards and outward. Gallery spaces are about the enjoyment of the art within, and at the same time, being able to have the opportunity to have art outside. And so these are sectional quality and all the functions within. And you will see some of the images we have. This is that atrium within. And the gallery spaces that allow you to enjoy the art, as I was telling you, at moments also take your view upwards towards the sky. Above and beyond the functional aspect of art viewing, we see this space as the core of this project, which is what we call the circular auditorium, which in essence is a center pool area that gathers the community for concerts, dramas, and other function of gathering. So in closing, we will leave you with a film of the Aranya Art Center. And so in this particular case, what is the future artifact? The future artifact was to create the periphery of this urbanity, take on the lines of the urban lines and make it complete and create a whole, a core that starts to celebrate the landscape and the seasonal changes of Qinghuangdao. To be able to be introverted, but at the same time use architecture as an apparatus to frame both the landscape that is completely open. The client at one point asked me, should I enclose this atrium with glass so we can use and be practical and so that we can use the center part of the building? We made it very clear that that would completely destroy the spirit and the soul of what we're trying to do, that this project needed to be open, or the core needed to be open to really celebrate the idea of using architecture to remind us of perhaps that rubble, that mound, that show, that place that was once significant. There was once a community here. There was once a community center in this particular place. And in many ways, a lot of them have been demolished, turned into a seaside development for people from Beijing. And that's the reason why they have all these, the chapel and the library as obvious programs to support this neighborhood. But this art center is a little bit different given the fact that it is surrounded by what they call new architecture, a new developers architecture. And the spirit of this space, if we were not so conscious about it, would have disappeared. You see the patterns we had 7 different patterns, so you can kind of see as the sun hits the building, it creates a different pattern and a different image throughout the day. And given the massiveness of this building, obviously we created delicate bronze details and lighting fixtures around the building. To our surprise, this has been so successful because it became the center of this community, and there's always activities. And given the fact that, especially with COVID, and not a lot of people can travel abroad, some of these places now have been places that people go to within China. And Qinhuangdao, surprisingly, is now a place where people go to visit many of these architecture. This inner circle now is in black because there is an exhibition, so it's painted in black. And after the exhibition, it's going to go back to white. But you can kind of see the power of what something so simple can accomplish in architecture. So this is really the end of our lecture, and we thank you again for RIBA, and we thank you VitrA for sponsoring the talk. We thank you for thank everyone for their support, yeah, that was our last project. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lyndon. Thank you, Rossana. We have about 10 minutes, I'd say, for a few questions coming out of that wonderful presentation. It's been a really rich and thought-provoking talk, and there's been quite an intense portrait as well of the last 20 years of kind of very rapid development in China in particular, and seeing your architectural responses to that has been wonderful and fascinating. I'm wondering if I can kick us off with a question that's looking not so much back at the last 20 years, but forward in time and looking at our present moment, which is of course a very particular one. We're catching up with you at a time when all of our lives have been kind of turned upside down a little bit by the ongoing pandemic. And I was wondering if you could tell audiences a little bit about both how it's affected you directly, so perhaps give us a sense of what the last 6 months or so have been like for you, but then also maybe we could move on to talk a little bit about the wider and broader implications of the pandemic, in particular in relation to the rapid urbanization and the decline of certain rural parts of the country, whether that is something that is now perhaps being reconstituted by the pandemic.
Well, I was going to say that maybe China's experiencing at this moment in time regarding the pandemic in a very, very different way from maybe the rest of the world. We here in Shanghai our lives have really almost gone back to normal, including our work, our families, going out shopping, the concerts have started, the movie houses have opened. So, and I would say the danger earlier on was more in the city where, urban hubs where there are a lot of, density and population. So from what we hear, the countryside is even better and even more back to normal. Obviously, for the rest of the world, it's very, very different. And in fact, we first experienced the pandemic when China, right before China closed its border. And we had, at that time, left China to go to Madrid we were receiving an award there and also giving a talk. And then from there on, I think the rest of the world, when we were in Madrid, there was like zero, no one was even talking about the pandemic. It was something that was happening only in China. And then from Madrid, we went to the US, I think. And then the US was also like, no one was talking about the pandemic. It was something happening far away. And then the schools closed. And then we brought our kids back to China right after kind of China opened its doors. So we feel like our timing with the pandemic has been like, very, like leaving China right before they closed and then coming back right after they opened. And then almost always escaping the worst time in a way.
But I think when you asked the question whether we were affected or how were we affected, naturally we were affected, both professionally and personally. Personally, because our daughter was tested positive for COVID. So you can imagine how that was really daunting for us as parents. And our daughter, upon landing in Shanghai or back after we were traveling, she was taken to a hospital. And we couldn't see her. So you can kind of see how not only was it daunting, there was just something we couldn't do anything as parents. So from a personal point of view, it was pretty scary. From a professional point of view, we didn't really know whether the projects, a number of our projects died, and we thought this would probably escalate. And we were glad that things normalized after 2 months because of the strict regulation here. But at home, it's a real issue because everyone is back at home, and all of a sudden, for a long time, we were not in the office. We were working at home, and the home is both your workplace. The home is also your theater. Because you can't go to the theater. So when you want entertainment, it is also a place where you entertain. The home is also the restaurant because you can't go to a restaurant, right? The home is also the school because our kids are now going to online schooling. So all of a sudden, the physical space is pushed to its limits. All of a sudden, furnitures that are put there just on display for it to look good is no longer that. It needs to be used. When you have a group of people coming together, you have to constantly, so all the perhaps programmatic requirements were pushed to its limits. And that's what the pandemic is doing. And in many ways, it's forcing all of us to think. Both Rossana and I are quite well rested because now all of a sudden we're not traveling to teach or lecture or
even this talk.
I
think we were supposed to.
Yeah,
we were supposed to
be in
London
and,
to do the talk.
And we have numerous projects in Europe. In fact, one of our first project in Paris just opened 2 weeks ago. So we were excited, but we have not been physically there. Our projects in the US, for instance, but we're very glad because we're glad because normally a client would want you there all the time. Now they completely understand. And it still can be done, but we just have to do it very differently. And we're also glad that we have a number of, we call bureaus, but a number of people who are stationed in Milan, people who are stationed in Paris, people who are stationed in the US that are doing different things and still taking care of the projects. Is it affecting the practice as a whole? Absolutely. But we have to really rethink and sort of recalibrate how we do practice.
Thank you. We've actually had a question from the audience. We've had a question from Asif Khan, the architect. So shout out to Asif. He's written, "Thank you for your talk. I've really appreciated your projects since I visited the Waterhouse Hotel in Shanghai. Impeccable thought and beautiful outcomes across all your works." And he has a question: are there any words of advice you would give to the average architect to achieve more meaningful approaches to recasting and rekindling regional vernaculars? How can they avoid crossing over into cultural appropriation, Orientalism, or tokenism? That's a question from Asif Khan.
It's a really, really good question. And it's also a question we ask ourselves all the time, particularly because our obsession deals with nostalgia, working with history, and we appropriating very often different elements within cultural artifacts. And so it's not so much about the what, but it's the how. I think as architects, we take cues and we take inspiration from everywhere. It could be the warmth of the sun. It could be the wind that blows in your hair, or it could be, the footprint of the buildings that I talked about in Yangzhou. And I would say for us, it's about being very mindful, the purpose behind how you use each element and reference, and also to be critical about the meaning behind each thing. So what we do actually, and with the teams that we work with, we find ourselves often always asking the teams to dig deeper. They come to us with a concept, and we say, well, why don't we look at this and dig deeper? And then we come up with more research, and then we say, let's dig even deeper. So with each subject, I think, whether you take, I don't know, dance, music, or a certain piece of art somewhere, if you look deep enough and you feel like you've exhausted all the knowledge about this particular reference, then I think you've done justice and you're able to use it, apply it in a meaningful way. I think the danger of Orientalism, for lack of a better word, is to identify aspects of culture from the lens of the other, and not really being able to occupy the space of the subject itself. It's always objectifying things. So I think it comes from deeper understanding, a critical look at the relationships as well, the power struggles, and so on and so forth.
And to continue with Rossana's thinking, the idea of being able to experience the space, for instance, that's a reason why typology is very important to us, to understand how people lived. In the north is very different from the people who are in Shanghai and people in the south, where ventilation becomes even more paramount, becomes more important. And there's a reason why certain typology exists differently in different parts of China. And the local tradition and how they make things are also very curious for us. We tend to shy away for ornamentation, not that it is not important or nor is it relevant, but if we don't understand it well enough, we tend not to use it. We try to sort of decipher it multiple times and really understand the meaning of it before applying it. Lately, we have been given a lot of projects in Europe, fortunate enough to be doing a lot of projects in Europe and in America. And that's when it becomes even more difficult, because we don't understand the lay of the land and the way the history and how people live in different parts of Europe. For instance, the north from the south, very different. And so we actually have to rely on many different people that have worked with us from those regions, or local architects that we work with, and other people who are in history and in literature, to enrich us, to help us. And I think if there is one advice, is to be humble. As architects, we don't know many things. It is important for us and imperative that we are one of many parts, and that we should ask questions and constantly challenge ourselves and be curious and constantly provoke our senses and say, is this enough? Is this good enough? And if we're not happy with it, I think by having a conversation and dialogue with a number of people outside of your own bubble, and I think that's when something beautiful will come out.
I think that's actually a wonderful note to end on, even though I'm sure there's plenty more that we could talk about, and plenty more questions and responses that your presentation threw up. But we are out of time, I'm afraid. I'd like to say thank you, big thank you to Lyndon and Rossana for your presentation. I'd like to say thank you to the audience for tuning in from all over the world, and for your questions. This lecture will be available on RIBA's YouTube channel within, I think, a few weeks' time. And there are also other lectures from the same series that you can look at on that channel. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye.